All right, the ladies said it's recording. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I'm Brian Snyder. Thank you for watching on YouTube and listening on Apple Podcast. And if you like the show, please rate, subscribe, and review. It helps. Also, if you like seeing my wife and I being exhausting, go to the Exhausting Snyders on TikTok. Now, I'm really excited. And I'm really honored to have this guest today because a few months ago, I read his book, Mastering Stand-Up, The Complete Guide to Becoming a Successful Comedian, because it's something I've been interested in all my life. And I was really moved by the book in many ways, and I'm excited to talk with him about it. And so here we have director, professor, author of Mastering Stand-Up, The Complete Guide to to Becoming a Successful Comedian. And he's also the founder and director of the American Comedy Institute in Midtown Manhattan. Stephen Rosenfield, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that warm, generous introduction.
Yeah, I'm nervous. I haven't been nervous in a long time, but you have launched helped some amazing comedians start their careers. Jim Gaffigan, Lena Dunham. It's really that's amazing. So how have you been holding up through the pandemic and everything?
Um, I hate to admit it, but I really enjoyed myself during the pandemic, actually. I think for several reasons. One of them is it really didn't curtail what I was doing anyway. I
Mhm.
still was working with the students and comedians that I've worked with. I think that the online thing works well with stand-up because it's one-on-one. It's like what we're doing right now.
Mhm.
So I was busy and I kind of had a good time. I'm also working on a second book, and it gave me more time to do that. So um, that and some excellent television binging.
Mm.
I had a perfectly good time.
Wow, that's lovely. I'm excited because I feel like my audiobook has come alive, and because I felt so close to you listening to your book, Mastering Stand Up, and I mean I was listening to it a few months back, and it really, I want to say it really, what I loved about it is it was so encouraging. And I really needed that because in 2004, I had just graduated from UCLA, and I was kind of on a performance high because I had finished my thesis, and I was acting in one of my friends' productions of 12th Night, and I was kind of on a performance role. And then my friend was running a room at the Derby, stand-up comedy, and it was a wonderful time because Gabriel Iglesias was starting out there, Matt Bronger, Kyle Kinane, Al Madrigal from the Daily Show, and I wanted to try doing stand-up comedy, and it was my first time, and I completely bombed. And uh, and part of it, I feel like, I mean, it was partly just I was terrified, but the other thing was my father, who was a professional comedian. I had a conversation with him beforehand, and I said, I want to try this and see how I do. And he's like, "Oh, you're gonna bomb."
Mm.
And and I was like, "All right, well, I'm gonna do it anyway." And that's all he said. He just kind of laughed and said, huh, "You're gonna bomb." And I was like, "All right." But I kind of needed to hear him say, "Yeah, you may bomb, but keep doing it." And I felt like your book, for somebody that is starting out, is really useful in the sense that it's so encouraging. And uh, and I felt, especially listening to you on the audiobook, I felt like you were encouraging me to do it. And I appreciated that. And I want to let you know how much that meant to me.
That's great. I'm sorry you had that experience starting out. Um,
Well,
you know, it's
my father, I mean, he's funny, but he's got, as a lot of comedians, a dark side, and he sometimes tends to shit on everything. And so, I mean, it's not just me, it's everybody. I mean, he'll do that to anybody, but I it was okay because I had support from my friends, and the only thing that I regret was that I brought a date to my first time, and that probably was not the best move. But yeah, so. But anyway, I want to talk about you. I want to talk about you and how you started. What is the genesis of Stephen Rosenfield?
Abenita Rosenfield.
Okay,
The
that
gen-
makes sense.
but as far as the comedy goes, so my background is in the theater
Hmm.
as a director primarily. And I lived in New York City, and in the 80s, there was a just explosion of stand-up comedy.
Hmm.
Stand-up, it was really rightfully considered for a while the rock and roll of a good part of the 80s.
Hmm.
The clubs were the clubs were packed until the wee hours of the morning. It was a very, very big and exciting scene. Um, and as a director, when I was in the city and not on a project, I would coach actors on roles that they were working on.
Hmm.
And because of the comedy boom, a few stand-ups started to uh, find me and wanted me to help them with their performance. And what I realized when I started working with them is that unlike an actor who's given a script and has the challenging job of making that um, um, exciting and entertaining, the stand-up is writing his own material. And I found that with almost all of the guys I was initially working with, um, their material wasn't that strong.
Hmm.
And so I started writing with them. And I did it really, I I did it because this was like a problem I had to fix. He was like,
Hmm.
we got to do something. You're
Yeah.
performing in 2 days. Um, but I realized that I think because of my background in the theater, um, I was good at writing in other people's voices, um, in with a mindset that was not my own,
Hmm.
what a playwright has to be able to do. And I found that I was really enjoying this a lot,
Hmm.
and that I was good at it. The results were, in comedy, as you know, the metric system is very, very clear. They
Yes.
either laugh or they don't.
Yeah.
It's like wondering if a poem that you've written is effective or not. And I realized that I was really exercising my creativity and as a writer and as someone who loves working with performers on their performances in ways that I really loved. So I kept with it. So I backed into this totally.
So before you got into the theater, like what were the early days like? I mean, was there like I mean, you obviously, I mean, I've read that you are the best known stand-up comedy professor in North America, right? So how did this all begin? I mean, what was your relationship to comedy before the theater? You started working in the theater.
That's a good question. I think for some people, comedy is like a language they speak. And you start speaking it pretty early on.
Mhm.
And I think that's what happened with me. And when you said that, uh, it reminded me of something, which is my father's sex talk to me, like when I was in, I guess, fifth grade or something like that, sixth grade.
Mhm.
There was a sort of a ritual in our house where after dinner we'd all help clear off the table and clean things up, and then one by one we'd come out in the living room and read. In those days magazines were very big, so Life magazine and
Mhm.
Saturday Evening Post. And I finished first, and I went out there and I noticed that nobody else was coming out. So I was wondering
Mhm.
what was happening.
Mhm.
And then finally, my father came out with a very hangdog expression on his face. I mean, I could tell he probably was sent there and was not
Mhm.
too happy about it.
Mhm.
And he sat down next to me and he said to me, "Are you masturbating?"
And
And
how
I
did that make you feel?
and I said to him, "Not at the moment,"
But
which
give me a few minutes.
which was the sum total of my sex education.
Really? So that was it?
So I was funny, and I guess I feel like some people are that way, and I
Mm.
was that way. It was something that I really enjoyed. I got into trouble with it, I think, as many folks who are funny do when they're young,
Mhm.
because I think it can be looked on sometimes as being impolite.
Mhm.
Um, um, but it was always there. I think it was always there.
So, I mean, it's interesting because so many people have different, reasons they get into comedy. Some people, it's a form of survival. For me, it was a way to connect with my father, who was very distant when he wasn't performing. And then, ultimately, like Mike Birbiglia talks about, is it's a way of uniting people. Um, and it's amazing. I'm always interested in how people come to comedy. And so, I mean, you mentioned in the book, Mastering Stand Up, you saw Lenny Bruce.
I did.
And how was that experience? That was one of your first experiences of seeing
Yeah.
stand up. Mm.
Yeah. I was very lucky. Because I saw him when he was really doing his stand-up,
Mhm.
before the drug addiction kind of overtook him.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people think of his work, who never saw him, because they've seen documentary footage where he's kind of rambling, and he's
Mhm.
he's high on drugs.
Mhm.
But I saw him early on when he was still actually doing a stand-up act, and
Mhm.
it was and remains to this day the most avant-garde experience I have ever had in my life.
Mhm.
Because I'll tell you what it was. There was a guy, he was on a stage, there was a microphone, all of that was familiar. But I had never experienced fear and laughter at the same time.
Mhm.
He scared me. He talked about, we talk now about, speaking the unspeakable as something that stand-ups do.
Mhm.
Um, but boy, back then there was a hell of a lot more unspeakable than there is now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's almost no unspeakable now, but in those days, there, and I still remember he did this joke. Um, and the guy who was the Pope, it was Pope John, I think the 23rd at the
Mhm.
time, who was somehow elevated to the papacy and a real genuine liberal humanist. I don't think
Mhm.
they ever made that mistake again, but
Mhm.
and he opened up the question of the Christian roots of anti-Semitism,
Mhm.
and to what degree the New Testament and the practice of Christianity was really responsible for a great deal of the anti-Semitism in the world, and
Mhm.
whether or not the Jews, this whole thing of Christ killing and all of that. So I
Mhm.
will never forget this. He's out there and he goes, okay, so there's a big debate going on, now, whether or not the Jews killed Christ. And I want to settle it this evening. I want to settle it once and for all. We killed him. If he comes back, we'll kill him again. And it was hilarious. And it
Yeah.
was also it was frightening at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, because the taboos that he was tilting at were were taboos that you really felt in ways that I'm not sure is even possible, frankly, these days when
Mm.
we're pretty free to talk about anything. I just opened up this conversation with you talking about masturbation. That wouldn't have happened when, in the year that I went to see Lenny Bruce. And
Yeah.
I think that he has a lesson, because a lot of, comics want to go to the edgy. They very
mm,
much want to go there. But in being a great fan of Lenny Bruce, I realized that he was doing something that a lot of comics who want to be edgy don't do, which is he was creating comedy out of really strongly felt convictions that he had. These were things that he really felt strongly about. And I know that a number of comics who want to be edgy start with, what can I talk about that would be an edgy thing? As
mhm.
opposed to, what do I feel strongly about? What can't I take anymore that I want to address through my comedy?
Yeah. I mean, it's very clear that he had, interest in social justice issues, um, and that was kind of the foundation for, his comedy, is addressing those issues, in a humorous way. And he was brilliant at it. And, the only thing I wish, my father worked with him at Ann's 440 in San Francisco, and they,
Wow.
were friends and hung out together. And some of the jokes, I mean, I would feel awkward even repeating them because they were so uh, shocking. Um, and But I mean, his whole life was, kind of, he was always being humorous, even in his and how he lived. And it was wild. He was wild. And um and I almost, I almost don't want to talk about it because I don't know what is appropriate for, for his remaining family members and things like that. It's like that
Well, this
intense.
sounds good. I think you have to talk about it.
But
This,
I mean, like, my father told me a story where, like, they went to a strip club together. And my father drank a lot, so I don't know what happened or not. But, like, I guess Lenny Bruce got up on stage with the stripper and, like, went down on the stripper, like, in the middle of the club, like stuff like that, wild, like, things that, like, so, it's that type of, he lived an intense life. And it I try to get things from my father from time to time, but, he's only willing to open up so much. And then, and I don't know. I mean, he's 87 years old now, so I'm almost 88. So, he doesn't, I'm not sure what he remembers, but, he does have a lot of, I think he misses, at the end, because Lenny was only talking about his court cases.
yeah, that's right.
And so I think that disappointed him, because
Yes,
he
it did.
really wanted,
I mean, yeah, I
yeah,
understand.
Yeah, that was the main thing, is he felt disappointed that he didn't get more, of his comedy because it was so focused on the court cases. And so,
Well, your
uh,
dad would know this. I mean, the other thing is he was high.
yeah,
He was under the influence and he really wasn't functioning as a comedian anymore. He wasn't. And that's,
exactly. That's exactly what he said. It just became about the court cases, and and eventually the drugs getting him in the end, which is
right.
horrible. And but it's so common though. I mean, I think I'm sure you have seen it many times. Like Greg Giraldo, Richard Jenny, um, all these comedians that didn't make it for whatever reason. And I mean, that's got to be hard as a teacher, guiding people. I'm sure you've had many times where you've heard, oh, this one of your students, either died of an overdose or killed themselves or something like that, right?
Um, Not frequently. I mean,
Mm,
have I? Yes, I
mm,
have. Uh, is it frequent? No, it's not.
mm.
It's not frequent.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm not sure really if it's more true of comedians than it is of any other group of
Hmm.
people. I mean, depression is a universal disease. So I'm not sure if there are also, as you know, there are also plenty of comedians who don't go to that, who are not living in that very, very dark place.
Mm.
There are plenty of them.
Yeah, I think about, there's like that documentary, what is it? Comedy Loves Tragedy, or is it the other way around? I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, I talk to other comedians about this a lot, about, well, do you feel like you need that, you know, um, it comes from, that comedy comes from either trauma or, the adapting to trauma or whatever. But I mean, that can be applied to all types of performers, not just comedy,
Here, let me
but
say this. I think revenge is a very powerful motivator for people in many, many fields. That notion of addressing the struggles of one's life.
mm,
And certainly comedy is about the struggles in your life, and comedy is criticism. And the basic insight of comedy is that if things are left the way they are, we're fucked. It's like
yeah,
we're gonna die, and that
mm,
sucks.
yeah,
And comedy, a lot of comedy is overturning that. Is overturning that.
yeah.
Uh, I found this wonderful etching. I'm guessing it was probably from the 16th century, and it's Harlequin, the comic figure of Harlequin, very powerfully built, and he's in the foreground of the picture. So he's very, very big. And he's pointing his finger at a trembling figure of death. And I think that's a very basic part of comedy, is that insight that if we just if we let the status quo continue, we're dead.
Yeah.
And it's wanting to upset that, turn it over. I think the Marx Brothers are a great example of that,
Mhm.
of making mayhem out of very sort of civilized settings, of overturning the apple cart. And certainly comedy is criticism, and comedy is about your problems, certainly, and your struggles. But I'm not sure that, I think part of the reasons why people love it so much is because everybody has their struggles. I think that's, what I tell my students is that you in a struggle is the golden land of comedy.
Yeah.
Um, you don't want the short end of the stick in real life, but that's where the laughs are. You want them in your comedy life. And I think people respond to it because, the people in the audience they're identifying with that struggle, with those struggles. And the idea of facing the music and laughing is a great thing. But part of it is facing the music, which is confronting, confronting the struggle, confronting the demons. So I think comedians have that in them, but I think so does the audience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So could you talk about some of the people that influenced you in your life comedically, either family or mentors or in your work?
Um, I would say it was mostly comedians that I really loved who influenced my work
Mhm.
more than I think mentors or family people. There was no one in my immediate family who, you know, was in the entertainment business or
Mhm.
um, but I think it was people that I really loved who were comedians that influenced my work.
Um, so who are some of the comedians that you were able to see and that you saw over and over again because you loved their material?
Well, Richard Pryor leaps to mind.
Hmm.
I adored Richard Pryor. I think he was the greatest actor comedian. And by that, I mean the acting. I mean, he would be literally on, I mean, the way a comedian is. And in those days, they didn't have sets. Now, your comedians have who perform in theaters, they have these elaborate sets behind them. In those days, there was no such thing. There was just you and the microphone.
Right.
And he could people that stage with, I mean, whole neighborhoods. He could people it, with the mafia guys in a club in Pennsylvania. His acting within his stand-up. I'm not talking about his acting in movies, but
Mhm.
within his stand-up was phenomenal. He was fantastic. It was
Yeah.
great. And it was theater. Um, uh, um, and that was an important realization for me that it is theater when it's done right. And his character work was so genuine, so imaginative, but
Hmm.
really genuine. It was so wonderfully observed.
Yeah.
It wasn't made of stereotypes. I tell my students, don't paint with a broad brush.
Hmm.
I don't like hearing, the thing about women is, or, the
Hmm.
thing about men, it's like, no. I mean, as soon as you say that, people are going to start to disagree with you.
Yeah.
Who are you talking? Who do you want to portray on that stage? Bring your powers of observation, really bring them alive, rather than deal with stereotypes. Because boy, did he do that.
And his vulnerability. I mean, would you agree that what he brought to stand-up comedy was that vulnerability that hadn't been there before?
Well, let me say this. Um, he played scared better, funnier than anybody I'd ever seen.
Hmm.
I mean, Richard Pryor scared
Yeah.
was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely, there was a vulnerability there for sure. And I
Mhm.
think that's why people loved him so much. It was part of the reason why people loved him so much.
Right. Right. Um, Yeah, I've been thinking about him a lot as well recently because of that vulnerability and his ability to go places and talk about things that, would be embarrassing for people, or but he was able to, use it in a way that uh, you know, uh, made people want to embrace him, I feel.
Well, he was, it's interesting because he was creative about it when he talked about setting himself on fire. He talked about it as, his pipe exploding,
Mhm.
which is not really what happened.
Yeah.
He was trying to kill himself,
Yeah.
um, but he didn't. There's creativity involved in this process. Is the point that I want to make here.
Mhm.
Uh, he changed that story up in a way that gave the audience more of an opportunity to laugh at it. Because, the thing is, they can't be worried about you and laugh at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, and I think if he spoke about it as a suicide attempt, I'm not sure if people would have felt comfortable laughing about it.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, so you were saying earlier about, you had comedians wanting guidance from you, and I'm assuming that that is how the American Comedy Institute was born, was through how did that happen? 1989, right?
Yeah. Um, well, a lot of comedians started coming to work with me.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and in working with them, um, I realized that a comedian is a hyphenated artist, and by that I mean comedians they're comedians, they're writers, they're actors, they're directors, they're producers. The walls that separate those crafts in other areas of the entertainment industry are really not there for stand-ups. Um, by that I mean you can win the Academy Award for as an actor, and people are not going to start asking about your film scripts. They're going to be offering you all, you're going to get a ton of offers for roles to play.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas as soon as a comedian really gets a buzz going and surfaces, there's immediate interest in their writing.
Hmm.
There's immediate interest in what's the television show,
Hmm.
what's the movie, what's the book. Um, and the American Comedy Institute really developed out of that sort of that insight, that a comedian, one of the things that I say to people is think big.
Hmm.
Honestly answer this question. Where do you want to go with your comedy? And don't be humble, be honest. Where do you want to go with your sense of humor and your comedy?
Hmm.
And then make sure you have mentors and training that will prepare you to do that. Um, which was really the genesis of the 1 year program that we
Hmm.
had. Because I had seen people, for instance, I'd seen people get opportunities that they simply hadn't been prepared for. It's not that they couldn't do it; they just didn't know how to do it.
Hmm.
In the 80s and 90s, I was getting a lot of calls from casting directors, for instance, who wanted uh, comedians for commercials, which made sense. I mean, commercials are funny, and a lot of time they're improvised. There's no particular script. Good idea.
Hmm.
And the first few comedians that I sent over had no experience with it. So when they were asked to slate, I didn't know what they were talking about.
Right.
Um, so I started the first commercial technique class just for stand-ups, just for
Mm.
comedians, so that they would be ready for that opportunity. I had another example is I had a student who got signed by a really good manager. And she came in to see me and she said, so he's arranged for me. I'm flying to LA tomorrow to give a final pitch. I have 3 meetings. It was like 2 networks and a production company for
Mhm.
my sitcom. And I said, wow, that's so exciting. What do you want to do today? She said, first of all, I don't even know what a final pitch is. And I don't have a sitcom.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, you know what? We're going to take this step by step. We're going to take the first step now. Pick up my phone, call your manager, and postpone the meeting.
Mhm.
You're not ready.
Yeah.
And the thing is that in the entertainment business, you may be wrong for something. Okay. In other
Mm.
words, an actor may not be what the director producers are looking for, or your sitcom may not be what this production company is looking for. But if it's good, even if you don't get it, but if it's good, you've just made another ally in the business.
Mhm.
They know you're good. You may not be right, but they could see that your work is good. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you go into that situation not knowing what you're doing, then that door is probably going to be closed to you
Mhm.
because of that. So a lot of my work at the American Comedy Institute was really um, offering comedians training in writing and performing stand up kind of across the board.
Now, at that time in 1989, there wasn't really any other schools around, right?
There were improv.
Mhm.
What was around were the improv companies had their own schools.
Right.
Second City had their school, and so on. So that is what was there at the
Mhm.
time, but nothing like what I was doing.
Now, how did that feel at the time when you were like thinking about starting this school? I mean, I think you mentioned it in the book about, making the decision to actually start the American Comedy Institute.
It felt good.
Mhm.
It felt good. I mean, I really love what I do.
Mhm.
And these are all, I knew stuff about television. I knew stuff about the theater. I knew stuff about acting. I knew stuff about writing. To be able to put those things, to exercise those things in me, I felt like it felt terrific. And the other thing is, I love the product. I think the product of laughter is a great product.
Yeah.
I used to think growing up that my picture of heaven was the sound of children laughing.
Mm.
It's I love that sound.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I can relate. I mean, I every time I hear, people laughing, I'm, I feel better. I
yeah,
feel,
and so do they.
yeah. And I'm like, I'm glad. I'm always grateful when I hear people laughing, even if I don't know what they're laughing about. Uh, I love that sound. Um,
Good sound.
and even, being blind now, I wasn't always blind. I drove a car up until I was 30. I'm 43 now. And, you know, hearing that even more, I'm more appreciative of it than I was before I lost my eyesight. So it's, yeah, I can relate to that very much so. Um, so, I mean, you worked with Jim Gaffigan. I mean, how was that? I mean, when did he attend the American Comedy Institute?
Um, he was with us for like 2 years.
Hmm.
He's somebody who, and I think a lot of people who it's, as you know, the apprenticeship for a comedian is a long one.
Hmm.
It's way longer than it is for an actor.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why is because of the writing involved, which is not being done by other people, but being done by you, maybe with other people.
Hmm.
Um, you got to create who you are. I mean, unlike an actor where there's the part the character's created, you have to create it. And that's a process that takes time.
Hmm.
Um, Jim just knew he was going to do this. I mean, he didn't say, he wasn't the kind of person who said, I'm going to give this 2 years. It was like he was doing it. He was
Hmm.
working, I think, at Gray Advertising at the time. He had a
Hmm.
big job in advertising. Um, but he was clearly, this was going to be his career.
Hmm.
Um, and he was really good. I mean, he was good right from the outset. He was good.
Did he start out with that, audience voice that he has that kind of commentates on his own jokes? Was that something to develop later on?
Absolutely. And that's the way it is for comedians. I mean, nobody, literally nobody comes out full blown.
Right.
There's no such thing as an overnight success in stand-up comedy.
Hmm.
Just, it does not exist. It takes time. And you find these things. And sometimes they just happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's why it's so important to get on stage as much as possible, because sometimes it just happens. But
Yeah.
no, he didn't have that. And he didn't have that curmudgeon kind of persona that he
Right.
had.
Yeah, I
Um,
had an opportunity to see him in Las Vegas. In It was right at the end of 2019, so before the pandemic began, and he and his opener was Ted Alexandro, and yeah, that was a wonderful experience. I'm just amazed at the amount of material that he's able to produce. I mean, he produces a special. I mean, constantly. It's amazing the amount of material he's able to generate.
well, it is impressive. I think part of it is that I think he partners with his wife
Yes.
in terms of writing, as almost, I would say virtually all comedians who are successful have people that they write with.
Hmm.
I remember it was a shock to me that to learn that Richard Pryor had someone who was writing for him, along with him, I should say.
Hmm.
I think one of the things about Jim, which is cool, is that he minds the subject. You know,
Hmm.
he's probably got, I don't know, he could have like 15 minutes on bacon. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's very economic that way. He gets the most out of a subject.
Yeah, I remember there was a recent special, I think it's available on Amazon Prime, where he talks about horses, and he keeps like bringing them, horses up every like he has callbacks to it. And yeah, it's very, very, very funny. He does definitely mine material and gets the most out of it. It's amazing. So one of the things that I really appreciated as a person with disabilities, I really appreciated in your book, Mastering Stand Up, the that you talk about, you know, um, coaching those with disabilities. And um, is there any experience that, in terms of with your students, that you enjoyed how they use their disability to uh, make it part of their act?
Oh, God, yes.
Mhm.
It's really, it can be just magical sometimes. It's amazing.
Mhm.
Because there are people that I've worked with severe, I mean, all disabilities are tough, but I mean, if you encountered them in a different situation, you might even be alarmed, frankly.
Mhm.
Um, um, and then they start doing their comedy and they're hilarious.
Mhm.
And suddenly the full human being, that wonderful human being is in front of you, and you're not looking at the handicap anymore.
Yeah. Mhm.
But yeah, um, and it's the kind of thing that you really have to talk about. I
Yeah.
mean, if it's, and the thing is, it can be it can be a great subject. It certainly can be. Go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna say, I mean, I just want to say I appreciate it because I felt, you're being very inclusive and it's really important. And I think, your book, it definitely helped because in my situation, I was like, that I sometimes worried, like, I don't want to make my act about, being blind, but it's a part of me. And it's become, how I live and how I function. And it's very funny. I mean, just being blind is in itself, the idea of it is funny. And there's a lot of material in that and that experience. And I don't know how relatable it is all the time, but I think the experience is pretty funny. And so I just wanted to thank you for being inclusive because that also helped me feel encouraged as well, from reading Mastering Stand Up. So I'm very grateful for that.
I'm so glad, because I mean, one of the things I really love about it, about this field, is that ultimately the only thing that matters to an audience is whether or not you're funny. I mean, they
Yeah.
that's it. And God, I remember I, there was an amazing experience with a fellow who was blind and deaf and
Mhm.
couldn't speak. And he came to New York, and I think on Craigslist, he found someone who could sign.
Mhm.
Um, and they just met. Um, and the chemistry between those two was great.
Mhm.
And he created this hysterical set at Gotham. I will never forget it. It was a magical night. This guy couldn't see, couldn't speak, and had no hearing.
Mhm.
And he did stand up really successfully. And again, after just a few seconds, there he was. He wasn't a blind. He was a funny guy.
Yeah.
Who he was, and that's
Yeah, that's amazing. He probably has a similar condition. I also have hearing loss as well. So
Mhm.
so he had a partner that would basically that he
He
worked
had a
with.
partner, but he
Yeah.
just met him. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
The thing is, it had to work out between the two of them too.
Yeah.
I think it was just, wonderful luck that he found somebody, just by
Yeah.
chance. It could be that the fact that he advertised for someone to do this as part of stand up, he probably got somebody who felt, you know, comfortable with that.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'm assuming, I mean, if he was not just doing ASL, American Sign Language, he was doing some type of tactile sign language, right?
it was very visual. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know the difference between those, Brian. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
what's the difference between those two forms?
American Sign Language is generally when somebody's deaf and they can see, they're signing to another person,
Right. Yes.
and um, uh, tactile sign language is somebody who is blind and deaf. And so they have to, it's all tactile. It's hands on hands, like signing.
I see. No, it
Yeah.
was the former with him.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it was definitely the former. I think you have to talk about it, but you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to only talk about it
mhm.
by any means, because that's the thing is that after a few minutes, uh, they'll go they'll go wherever you want to go with them,
Yeah.
whatever you want to talk about. But you do. I mean, I remember working with remember working with a guy who had one arm,
Mhm.
and he was doing observational stuff. And I was like, this stuff is good, but you got to say something.
Yeah. Yeah. You
I
can't,
mean, you walk out there with one arm,
yeah.
you got to say something about it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has to be addressed. But that doesn't have to be the whole act by any means.
Right. 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 Of course. So, I mean, so what's happening with the Institute now? I mean, I know COVID's probably affected it
Yeah,
somewhat.
yeah, it has.
Yeah.
But our classes are now all online,
Mhm.
which is really cool because it's like we've always had people from all over the world come and do the workshop, which is a wonderful thing to work with people from other countries.
Mhm.
But now they can actually be in the workshop at literally the same time without leaving home, which is cool.
Mhm.
So our classes have essentially moved online. And our performances are happily live and in the clubs again. But that's how we're rolling now.
That's wonderful. That's really so. The website for those that are interested, it's comedyinstitute.com, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
All right. So excellent. Comedyinstitute.com. So now you have another book. When is that going to be out? And can you talk about it, or is it a
I can talk
secret?
about it a little bit. No,
Yeah.
it's a mystery.
Mhm.
It's about a detective who's a frustrated stand-up comic,
Mhm.
who's in the police department
Mhm.
of a suburban New Jersey town,
Mhm.
and is encountering his first murder case. And
Sounds like a great movie.
it's called The Stand-Up Detective.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
That's great. When is that going to be released?
Well, I'm very close to finishing it.
All right.
Um, but that actually deals with, you were asking about my own background, because it's like he talks the language of a comedian and gets into trouble, I mean, a lot of times,
Mhm.
because it would be looked upon as being inappropriate in
Right.
circumstances, but that's his way of, I mean, he can't help himself.
Yeah.
But that's actually kind of an example of it. I was thinking about, if I can say this, about when we opened up and you were saying about your dad saying that you were going to bomb.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I just want to make this point. The single most important technique in performing stand-up is what I call joyous communication.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that you're happy, because, there's, I don't know, I've never seen a happy comedian. I mean, as far as a comedian getting out there and
Right.
talking about how wonderful his life is,
Mhm.
that doesn't work. Um, Joyous communication means that you are taking joy in communicating to your audience how pissed off you are, how frustrated you are, whatever your feelings are.
Yeah.
But this encounter with the audience is something that you are taking joy in. And hopefully in people's lives, when something goes down that's really, rotten, there is someone There's that phone call of, you won't believe this is worse than we thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
That's joyous communication. And there's this interesting dynamic that happens, which is that an audience, once the show starts, stops feeling what they're feeling, and they start feeling what you, the comedian, is feeling. And that's true that's really true that in other words, you might be upset about something. You go see a great movie and you are not thinking about that anymore. You're caught up in the movie, or in the theater, in the play, or in a comedy club, in the comedian. They set the weather. And if a comedian comes out and you are sensing he couldn't wait to get up on that stage, it's like, thank God you're here.
Mhm.
As Joan Rivers famously said, which is like pure joyous communication. Can we talk? I mean, that is joyous communication. And I tell my comics, your mantra right before you go up should be, I'm going to have a great time talking to these people about whatever, about stuff you're angry about, stuff you're frustrated, whatever it is. I'm going to have a great time talking to them about it. And when you bring that up on stage, they feel it. They feel what you feel, and they pick up on it. And if you're communicating, I'm having a great time talking to you, they're feeling like, I'm having a great time listening to you. And you can get into that headspace. That's why I say mantra. It's cognitive. What you are thinking has a great deal to do with what you're feeling. And that's why I was saddened by your dad saying that, because you don't want to go into a situation hearing, or thinking, I'm going to bomb. I mean, it's true, you may bomb.
Yeah.
That's possible. But you want to go in feeling like, I want to have a great time talking to these people. And I mentioned this in the book. I'll tell you where I learned about this. I had a student once who, and I've only had a handful of people like this really in all of these years. He wasn't funny. I mean, it's just, he wasn't funny. And I would write, I mean, he couldn't come up with stuff, and I would write stuff and he would just get it wrong in that exact way that would, but he mysteriously loved stand-up. It was a very strange thing, but he loved it. And when he would get up in front of class, you could tell this was the high point, of his existence. You could tell that. And we all watched him with big smiles on our faces. Nobody laughed because he wasn't funny. And he'd finish and we'd give him warm applause. And we were performing. That workshop culminated in a performance at Caroline's, which at the time was, the Yankee Stadium of comedy in New York City. And you would think a rational person who'd been in a 3-week comedy workshop and never once gotten a laugh, that person would be scared of what was going to happen. And he walked out there like Babe Ruth. Okay? He walked out there like Pavarotti.
Yeah.
And you could tell he was where he dreamt of being. And he started his set, and the same thing happened. People smiled, nobody laughed because he wasn't funny. But that sense of joyous communication was so tangible to everyone. that they enjoyed him. And when he was done, he got a very warm applause.
Yeah.
Now, this guy had no future as a comedian because, I mean, you can't just do that as a
Mm.
comedian. You have to do that and have really terrific material and terrific delivery. But what he taught me was how he could, without those things, pleasantly engage his audience. And that is the most essential part of the work of a comedian is that engagement, where people are feeling like I'm having a really good time sitting here with this guy.
And I remember that story very well from the book. And a couple weeks ago, I went up for the third time and did
I
stand
saw
up.
that. I saw it. I'm
A-
glad you sent it to me. And you had that.
And I that was what I thought about immediately before going on stage
Oh,
was,
that's
and
wonderful.
yeah, that and I'll tell you, it helped because I was an actor. 20 years ago, I was performing. I worked with Richard Foreman, who's an avant-garde
Really?
theater
Oh
artist.
my
Yeah.
God. I loved his stuff.
Yeah. And I was confident, or I don't know if I was confident, I might have been arrogant. I don't know what I was, but I had something. And and so as I began to lose my eyesight, that went away. And then so what I'm trying to do is go back and kind of become a phoenix, rise from the ashes. And because comedy has been something, a part of my life my whole life. And I didn't realize until now how pervasive it was. And so even as a dramatic actor, it was always there in the background, and so when I went up, on, it was November 5th, that is what I thought about. And it was from reading that story about
So glad
enjoying. I'm
that's
sorry, what?
I'm so happy. That makes me so happy to hear that because when I watched when I you sent me the video of it, I could feel that from you,
Yeah.
which is really, really great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty rusty. I mean, I got a lot of work to do, but it felt I enjoyed the process. And there's one bit where I have a joke about having to run under a branch, like in the opening scene in MASH when they're playing "Suicide is Painless," and I think that's a really funny joke, and it didn't do well. But I enjoyed. When it didn't do well, I thought I kind of like this, and because I thought I think I know how to fix it. And it's funny because I had another professional comedian friend. He watched it and he mentioned that same joke, and yeah, I enjoyed every aspect of it. I enjoyed the laughs. I enjoyed the parts that didn't work because it made me think, I think I know how to improve that. I think I know what didn't work, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
That's great. I
Yeah.
have an idea for that, by the way.
Oh, really?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
My suggestion is that you talk about, sometimes people think that people who are blind, they don't have an awareness of like, natural things that people see, but it's not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
That I've become an expert on trees only since I've become blind.
Right.
And I can tell you, when I walk into when I walk into a tree, I can tell from where it's hitting me. I can identify what it is right away.
The level of pain it gives me. I know
Yes,
exactly what type of
exactly.
tree it is. Yeah.
Yes,
I like that. Yeah, yeah. That's what I love is there's something that can be improved upon. And I'm so excited about it. And I'm so grateful that I encountered your book, Mastering Stand Up, because it has helped me because your voice was the voice I needed to hear to to push me forward, and I deeply appreciated it.
it's
And
wonderful.
Thank you so much. So, um, before we close up, I usually ask, I've been asking these questions, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are. If you could speak to everyone on Earth simultaneously, as almost as if an omnipotent voice, what would
Uh,
you say to everyone?
Buy low, sell high.
Say that again.
Buy low, sell high.
Okay, that's great. What would your epitaph say?
Oh, that's interesting. Um, wow. I used to think I wanted my epitaph to read, he's running a little late, but I haven't given it much thought since then.
Right. Well, that's fair enough. Fair enough. So yeah, you were on time today, so I appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, I'm really honored that you have spent this time with me and shared your wisdom. And like I said, I'm grateful for your book, Mastering Stand Up: The Complete Guide to Becoming a Successful Comedian. And the American Comedy Institute. That is that's sounds like a lot of fun. And everybody that's listening and watching, please go to comedyinstitute.com. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close out?
Um, Only that you're terrific at what you do. This was I do this, you know, on occasion,
Mm.
and you're really a terrific interviewer. And I think part of it is I felt like you gave me the opportunity to express myself, but I also felt like you expressed yourself also. Um, and hopefully your audience is going to get to know both of us better as a result of your skill as an interviewer. So bravo, well done.
Thank you. Thank you. That means so much to me, and I deeply appreciate your time and the wisdom that you've shared, and sharing everything that is alive within you. I deeply appreciate it. And everybody, this is Stephen Rosenfield. He is the director and founder of the American Comedy Institute. And if you'd like to learn about it, go to comedyinstitute.com. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in comedy, please get Mastering Stand Up: The Complete Guide to Becoming a Successful Comedian. It's available on Amazon and anywhere probably where books are sold. And the audiobook, I love the audiobook, by the way. I love that you read it. I wish more authors would do that. Thank you for doing that. It's wonderful to hear your voice, and thank you for sharing this time with me. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun. I enjoyed it, Brian. Thank you very much.
All right, now we're going to have our awkward ending. Here we go. Oops, wrong button. See how awkward that was? I already started it that way.